I can see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe more people during a trade show. That's one travel budget. That's just 2 nights in a hotel or 3 nights in a hotel. It's not me flying all over the country to meet one-on-one.
I want to welcome you to my sales podcast, where we have one focus and one focus only. That is helping you, the sales community, and sales leaders create more conversations with more qualified buyers, ultimately leading to improving your sales productivity and closing more deals. Each show, you will hear from sales leaders, practitioners, and influencers to help you find, engage, and connect with more buyers. I'm Mario Martinez Jr., and you're now listening to the Selling with Social Sales Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Gong.io, the #1 conversion intelligence platform for sales. Gong helps you achieve revenue success, which means you win more deals, skyrocket rep performance, and gain critical market intelligence. Get powerful visibility into your customer conversations with Gong. Head over to Gong.io to get started. Hey, everybody. We've got today with me a very, very special guest. And for those of you that don't know, there's actually a history. There's actually a story that goes behind this particular guest. I called her and said, I'm thinking about going out on my own. This was over 3.5 years ago. I need some advice on whether or not entrepreneurship is for me and leaving corporate. And I want to welcome to the show my friend. You may have heard the video. You may have even seen the story or even heard the story on the video. My friend, Alice Heiman. Alice, welcome to Selling with Social.
Thank you. I mean, it's exciting to have this opportunity to chat with you. We chat a lot, but not on air. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And yes, it's true. Mario did call me. And what did I tell you, Mario?
It was actually a really interesting conversation. So for those of you listening in, I said, Alice, I'm thinking about going on my own, starting my own business, doing then social selling consulting, which we've now transformed into a digital sales training company. And I said, Alice, what do you think? What should I be thinking about? And Alice said, I have 2 questions for you. I said, okay. She said, first, do you have enough money in the bank that would sustain your current lifestyle for the next year? And I said, yeah, I mean, I definitely would sustain my current lifestyle for the next year. Maybe a slight couple, tweaks here and there. But yeah, I definitely do. And then she said, okay, fantastic. You've passed 1 out of 2 questions. Now, my next question to you is, are you willing to risk it all? And I was like, ooh, that's a really good question. I think I'd be willing to risk it all, but I'm not sure if my wife would be willing to risk it all. And then Alice says, okay, hold on. I said there was 2 questions, but actually now there's a 3rd question based upon what you just said. And Alice, I don't know if you remember what you said. You remember the question you asked me?
I think I said, do you want to stay married?
That's exactly what you said. That's exactly the question you asked me. Do you want to stay married? And so I said, yes, I do want to stay married. But turns out, everyone, you may not have heard the story, but it turns out that I told Alice, I said, I have a special circumstance. I actually have almost signed 2 signed statement of works with 2 Fortune 100 companies that would basically pay for the company. And she said, well, then what are you calling me for?
That's right. I'm like, way to go. Good job.
Yeah, that's the story. And Alice was the person that I called to say, what do you think? Can you help me out? Because I respect Alice Heiman. And now, for those of you that don't know her, Alice is actually the co-founder and CRO, Chief Revenue Officer of TradeShow Makeover. And also was really most well known for as the founder of Alice Heiman, which was a consulting company for B2B sales companies and helping them train and coach and help really drive revenue and grow revenue. And one of the big unique focuses is all around trade shows. So I'm excited to have her on board because for all of you out there that are being asked by your sales leaders or marketing leaders to go work a booth, You may be saying when you get those messages, what? Come on, I got to work a booth and I never get the leads. What's going on? We've got some amazing tips for you on how to actually convert your trade show booth duty and trade show activities pre, during, and post to be able to make more money. But before we get into that, Alice, do me a favor. I obviously gave an intro about you. Is there anything that I missed about your background?
What I wanted to just say to everybody is that if you have a business-to-business complex sale, it's likely that you're using trade shows or events of some type to generate leads. It could be online events, it could be in-person events, or it could be participating in other events by sponsoring or exhibiting at trade shows. This is very common. And that's why out of my 20 plus years of working with companies who have a business-to-business complex sale, I've had to become a trade show expert out of necessity because my clients were all attending these trade shows and not getting enough results from them. Not because the marketing wasn't pretty and shiny, because the booth was pretty and the marketing was pretty and all that, but because really the salespeople didn't know what to do before, during, and after to actually turn that activity and those conversations, those leads into closed deals. And so a lot of spend and not enough ROI. So it was just really, as we say, necessity is the mother of invention. And so Diana Guerin and I were sitting around talking last summer about this time, and TradeShow Makeover was born. So I'm just crazy enough, of course, to try to run two companies. So, I don't have enough to do between 9 and midnight, right, Mario?
Well, why not? I mean, you might as well. I love it. Well, before we get into some of the deeper dives, I love that history and that background and really identifying the problem of what's happening from what I see as failed attempts at leveraging trade shows. Do me a favor, Alice. Tell us something nobody would know about you, even if they were to look at your social profiles.
Yeah, there's probably quite a few things, but I will only reveal one to you today.
It better be juicy. And Alice, I know you. We're friends. I know you, so it better be something juicy.
Yes, and then if you want more of these tidbits, you'll have to connect with me on LinkedIn and tell me that you heard me here on this show, and I'll reveal another.
Okay.
But in my youth, right after I graduated from college, I was a junior high special education teacher. So I taught emotionally disturbed, behavior disordered, and mentally retarded children. At that time, for some reason, someone thought it was a good idea to put them all in the same class together. Wow. So I was fresh out of college with a degree in education, a degree in special education. And I was thrown into this junior high program with these emotionally disturbed, behavior disordered, and mentally retarded kids. And it was mostly boys. And I was scared to death.
Wow. So, and how long did you do that for?
I did that for 3 years. Wow. Unbelievably. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. These kids also, I might say, I taught on the line between Chicago and Evanston. And so this was a rough neighborhood.
Right.
And I had my own police officer who would go round up my students who didn't show up and bring them into school. And I had kids who came from very broken homes and a lot of poverty. And so I actually brought breakfast to school every day for these kids because I needed their brains to work. And without food, brains don't work so well. Wow. Some of them were afraid to go around the other kids, and so they wouldn't go to lunch. And so even though I was supposed to, by law, have a lunch break, I spent my lunchtime with these kids as well. And some of them were so impoverished, I had to take them to the Goodwill and help them get clothing. I had to take them to get haircuts. I had to take one of them to the eye doctor because I could tell he couldn't see and his parents weren't able to do that. And I actually got a friend of mine who was an optometrist to give him glasses for free. So this was a really interesting career that I had, and it was hard and it was heartbreaking. But I did do that for 3 years. And I will tell you, honestly, I was truly, truly exhausted emotionally and physically at the end of that time of those 3 years. And I stayed in teaching for another 10 years, but I did not teach special ed. I went into regular ed, and then I got a master's degree in reading and became a reading specialist.
I don't know what it is that you said, but you're the first person that has made me tear up and cry on my own show.
Oh my gosh.
I think I need a minute. We don't have to delete this part of the recording.
Okay. Mario's the clown. Talk amongst yourselves for a moment. Just talk amongst yourselves.
I'm having a moment here. Everybody listening in, I'm having a moment. I had no idea, for those of you that wonder like whether or not I know what people are going to say on the show, just so you know, there's two questions that I ask on my show that the guest has no idea, unless they've listened to my show, what it is that I'm going to ask them. So I have no idea what people are going to say. And Alice, I guess that struck a chord for me. I gotta get myself together here. I guess it struck a chord with me because it's funny. Whenever you talk about those that are, mentally retarded, handicapped, emotionally disturbed, all throughout my junior high and high school, one of the things I was a fairly well-known individual within school. And one of the things that I couldn't stand, one of the things I just couldn't stand was injustice. And all throughout school, hold on, I gotta wipe the tears away. All throughout school, children are, and these are kids, my peers, that they would, take time and they would make fun of the mentally retarded or the handicapped or, the physically disabled. And I would hear that. And even as a popular individual, I literally would go toe to toe with individuals. And if I had to throw blows, I would throw blows because it was just such an injustice. And the story that you tell of some of the things that you had to do, you had to take people to the eye doctor, you had to feed these children because they weren't being fed at home because of, the financial circumstances and, the dysfunctional families that they grew up from. Those things that I saw, and I was coming from a poor background as a poor individual, I never had that happen. Obviously, I didn't have any disability, but I never went hungry. My parents would always feed us, even if it was tortillas, beans, and rice, right? If that's what I ate, that's my mom would sacrifice herself to feed the children, and same with my dad. And so whenever I saw this injustice, it just touched a special moment. And
Wow.
All right, people. First time someone's made me cry on my own show. I need a minute.
Take your time.
All right, I'm back. Just hearing that story about you as an individual, it's hard sometimes because we don't see, we see so much injustice and social injustice, and I'm totally digressing. I'm taking time from your show here, but just a month ago, for the very first time in a very, very, very long time, did I feel someone had discriminated against me and my wife and my mom. We went to a restaurant, and it was in Oakland of all places. It was in Oakland of all places, but it was a very high-end restaurant. It was a wine tasting event, and we were the only family there. It was my mom, my wife, and myself. My wife's half Black and half Korean, and my mom is, of course, of Hispanic descent, and of course, I'm Hispanic descent as well. And there was about 50 people that were there for this wine tasting and pairing, and everybody was of Caucasian background, except for one family that was Asian and one family that was Indian, or couple. When I say family, it was couples. It was mainly couples. And they had made some mistakes with moving people around, and they came to us and they said, we need you, to move tables and move around. And so we moved, one time, and then they went and asked other families, other couples, and all the couples that they asked were of Caucasian background, and they said no, they wouldn't do it. And so they kept coming back to us and saying, we need you to move. We need you to move. And I finally said to them, enough's enough. This is the third time you've asked me. asked somebody else and they made a big stink about it. And I went back and I pulled the owner of the restaurant behind and I said, enough's enough. You didn't ask any other family more than one time. And most of them said no, that they're not going to move. And here you're asking me, why are you targeting me? Like, well, I don't understand this. And so whenever I hear those things and someone like yourself just talk about a great story about who you are as an individual, kudos to you. That's amazing that what you did. And I took up a lot of time on this podcast just talking about something that's near and dear to my heart. And I'll give you the time, of course.
You know what, Mario? I think it's good in business for us to talk about all kinds of things. And I think we have so many issues with diversity that we do need to talk about them. And the fact that you were made to feel less than in any way whatsoever is so totally unacceptable. And if we don't continue talking about those kinds of things, they're going to continue happening.
Yeah.
And it's really important. And just before we get on to trade shows, I'll say one more thing about my years teaching. I poured my heart and soul into those kids every day of my life, and it was hard. But what was the worst thing was the discrimination that not only those kids, but myself as a special education teacher had to endure. At that time, which was a long time ago, because, I'm wise now. Yeah. So in this time, it was just after a law had been passed, Public Law 94-142, which said that children were to be educated in the least restrictive environment, which means that schools had to change and they had to allow these kids who had been discriminated against for their disadvantages. They had to allow them back into the regular classrooms. This is what made my job particularly hard because it was the beginning of this time. And the teachers did not want my students in their class. And they told me in no uncertain terms. And they discriminated against my students and they discriminated against me. And you think, well, a white woman, what were they discriminating against? Well, I actually had a science teacher come up to me and say, "Are you retarded?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And here I am, all of 21 or 22 years old, and I didn't even understand what he was saying to me. Yeah. He's like, "Well, are you retarded because you teach the retarded kids?" I said, I was like just indignant. And of course, I played soccer in college, so I was not a ninny, of any type. I was like, and I'm pretty tall. So I just stood up and looked at him and I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "No, in fact, I'm sure I'm a lot smarter than you because I have a very high IQ and I also have a degree, blah, 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 blah." And I said, these kids deserve the opportunity to learn and they deserve an opportunity to be around other children that they can be friends with. And so, I just basically knocked the guy on his butt, and he was, quite a bit older than me, but he was discriminating against me and my students, and it went on. And so that made the job even harder, but it's something I'm really proud of, the fact that I was able to help a lot of those students, and they came back to me years later. Some people think, well, they thought all the kids were whatever terrible words they used to describe my kids sometimes. But these emotionally disturbed and behavior disorder kids had very high IQs, not low IQs. That was the problem with putting them in with the mentally disadvantaged kids, because that was a bad mix. But back then we didn't know. So they were all discriminated against, and people didn't even give them a chance or get to know them or see them for who they were. So I think this is still happening today. It happens in business. It happens in everyday life. And we should all stand up for all human beings and let them have the rights they deserve, make sure they get the rights that they deserve.
Wow. Boy, that we went totally down a path that I didn't expect to go down. And I love the story and I love you for bringing that up. And it explains a lot, actually, something I didn't know about. And as a friend of yours, it explains a lot about who you are and the type of person that you still are today. Amazing. So let's transition from a very deep, topic.
Yeah, let's not discriminate against trade shows because they are a great lead generation tool.
So for all of you listening, and wow, you just went through a Dr. Phil moment right there with myself and Alice Heiman. And now we're going to talk about a different subject, and we're going to talk about trade shows. All right. So we talk about, we have sales folks listening, we got sales leaders listening. and marketing leaders as well. Most of us have probably listening in, have worked a booth. We've attended a trade show. We've even attended trade shows without having a booth so that we can work the crowd, right? Let's talk a little bit about some of the biggest trade show fails that you've seen, especially there was a reason why you started TradeShow Makeover. But I want to talk about, for the sales community, what are some of the biggest trade show fails that you've seen?
The biggest one I see is lack of preparation. And it shows up at the booth, right? So you can tell when a company has not prepared properly to be at a show because of the types of things they do there. So one of the biggest examples of that is the people working the booth, whether they're salespeople or marketing people or senior executives, a mix of people, they are not experienced in working a booth. And so they do things that really are not helping them to have memorable conversations and generate high quality leads. Some of the things they do, for example, is they look at their phone instead of
the people
to see who's coming by the booth. And so they're like, oh, well, nobody's in the booth, so I'll just look at my phone. They walk out of the booth. So sometimes they get a call and they just walk right out of the booth and leave whoever behind to fend for themselves. They do things like cat call out to people in the aisle and say things like, hey, do you ever use blah, blah, blah? Or did you ever think about using blah, blah, blah? And just kind of cat calling out to people in the aisle. And then when people do come in the booth, they go right into demo mode, or they start pitching immediately without starting a conversation and building a bit of a relationship. And that's all because they didn't prepare ahead of time and they didn't train people on what type of behavior to have at a show that would generate great results.
Very, very, very true. I've seen every single one of those. And I will admit, I've probably actually done a couple of those, especially when you take the phone call and you walk right out of the booth, right? And most times that I had to work booth duty was because I was asked to do it and I really didn't want to. And in most cases, I knew that I was working booth duty because somebody else had worked it for me and they were finding leads for me. And so I had it, it was my turn to do it and kind of give back to the sales and marketing community. But it was just like, nothing ever came to me, right? So when you and I were preparing for, the podcast, you had mentioned that there's a lot of event organizers that don't want salespeople working at the booth. Talk a little bit about that, because I've only known salespeople and, of course, some of the marketing events people to work the booth. And, of course, the bigger the company and the bigger the booth, the more people that they bring in. But generally speaking, it's usually pre-sales, the salespeople, and event planners that are working the booth. So tell me a little bit about why they don't want salespeople working booths.
Yeah, I think you're right. It depends on the size of the company who's going to work the booth, because sometimes you may need as many as 15 people, and because you need shifts and breaks and, there's other networking events. So there's all kinds of things that go into determining who should work the booth. But when I started this company last year and really started talking to a lot of event managers at companies who usually reside in marketing, the event managers reside in marketing, they'd say to me, we don't want the salespeople at the booth. And I was like, well, explain that to me. I don't understand. And Laura, like, well, they don't know what to do. It's embarrassing. They walk out of the booth when they have a call or whatever. And that's the kind of thing that makes the marketing people not want sales in the booth. But really, the problem is, it just goes back to what I just said. The salespeople are not trained properly. So working a booth is a different kind of selling, right? It's more of a networking than it is like if you're an SDR and your job is to just call people and get them to schedule an appointment. That's one kind of selling. If you are the person who's asking all the questions and moving the sale down the pipeline, that's a different type of selling. If you're the closer, there's also a type of selling that needs to be done at trade shows, and we just don't bother to teach it to people. Now, you'd think they would know, but in many cases, they don't know. And so the marketing and events people just simply prefer not to have the salespeople there, and they will staff with others from the company, or sometimes they outsource.
Third party.
Which I think is,
that's even more crazy.
It's crazy. I mean, there's so many bad things that can happen when you do that, because again, it doesn't matter who's working the booth. They need training. They need to be prepared. So I understand that salespeople, if they're not busy and calls coming through from a client, they want to take it. I get it. But when you're in the booth, salespeople, you turn your devices off and you focus your attention on the people who are at the show. You gain eye contact, you smile, you strike up conversations. You don't pitch, you don't sell. You invite them into the booth to continue the conversation. And you have to learn how to have these relationship building conversations that are memorable and bring insights so that the people you're talking to want to continue the conversation after the show.
I have kind of a question thought here for you. First off, let me make a statement. In my 22nd year of selling, in my 21 years of complete full years of selling, I have never, ever, ever, not one time, anybody ever trained me on how to be able to work a booth, right?
Right.
I was told, got on the phone with marketing, here's the preparations, here's the agenda, here's the tchotchkes we're going to give, here's our objective, which is to scan the badge cards, bring people into the booth, you hand them off to Johnny. No one ever said, here's what you say. No one ever said, here's what you do. No one ever said, here's the target person that you're looking for. No one ever said, here's the eye contact you're looking for. Shifty eyes, don't talk to them. I don't know if that's true or not. I'm just up, right? Shifty eyes, don't talk to them. People that make eye contact with you, ask them a question. What's the question that you ask them? Nothing, never. And I've been in 5 different industries, from software to consulting. And Fortune 100 companies to super small companies. Yeah. So never had any training. Now, that's the story to talk about. I have a theory, and I'd love you to tell me what this theory. I have 2 thoughts. If I'm going to have people work the booth, I want to have my business development reps work the booth. I want to bring in my business development. Those are the people that are responsible for working booths every single time. So if I have 50 BDRs, I'm rotating those 50 BDRs for all my booth events all over the world, all over the country, and I'm sending those people because that's what they do. They're responsible for doing business development. That's one idea. The other one is, wait a minute, don't put your green newest people who are the frontline sales folks in the booth. No, take your top 15% or 20% top sellers and you have them work the booth so that because they understand they're business relationship builders. They understand the business problems that you're solving. They could ask the questions. So I have 2 thoughts, like which one is the right group? The one I just mentioned, the first one, BDRs, or the second one, which is your top 15, 20%, or is it none of the above?
Well, first of all, I think it's great for you to even be thinking about that. So if you're going to do a trade show, a lot of thought pre-show needs to go into who is going to be there. And I think it's very different for mature companies versus startups. I think it's different for large corporations versus small. I think it depends what size booth you have. I think it depends on what your goals are for the show. So let's start off. We register for the booth, and usually we do that a year in advance, or at least, 6-8 months in advance. And at that time, we need to have clear understanding of why are we going to be at the show? Why did we pay money to exhibit or sponsor? What are we expecting? What do we want from this? So marketing may have some goals around branding and name recognition, and sales may have some goals around generating qualified leads and getting closed deals. And there may be even some other further goals that you have. But based on those, that's how you start to decide who should go. And again, it's going to depend on a lot of other factors, how big the booth is and how many days the show is and whether you're a large company or small. Especially when you're starting out, I like a blend of people. I like the senior executives and the founders to be at the booth. I like the salespeople to be at the booth. I like some customer success, some subject matter experts. What I want to do is make sure as a startup, you look really smart. And you have all the people there that you need. So if you're a startup, I don't know much about you. You don't have longevity. So I want to see who's that senior team. I want to meet that owner and know that this is a smart person. And this is someone that, I would look to for good advice and understand why they started the company and that kind of thing. I don't expect them to know everything, though, about the way things work. So I would want them to have a subject matter expert there. If I had questions that go deeper, there's someone there who can answer those. I like to have the salespeople there because they're typically more outgoing and will make the first eye contact and strike up conversations and draw people into the booth to meet the founder or to meet the subject matter expert. So if I have an early stage company, And I'm really working on our branding and our reputation. And maybe we won't get as many qualified leads because we're new, but we can really build our brand. And so we need that blend of senior people, co-founders, subject matter experts, and salespeople to be at the booth working it together. So I think that's one consideration. In much larger companies, I have one client that does 100 trade shows a year, 3 really big ones, and then a bunch of regionals. And at the very big shows, their booth, my gosh, I don't even know, maybe it's 500 square feet. It's humongous. It takes up a huge portion. At these big medical shows and big shows like World of Concrete and stuff, some of these booths are really gigantic. Well, then you have to think, okay, do we have enough salespeople to staff that? Because people do need a break. I mean, there's nothing worse than someone who hasn't had any water, their feet are killing them, and they're starving. You really want them talking to the prospects walking by?
That's why they run off with their phones.
Right. So we do want to think about who should staff the booth, based on a variety of things. And just having, like you said, a bunch of BDRs there who don't have a lot of information. They're not subject matter experts and they can't have deeper conversations. It's not a good idea. So, for example, if you're at a show like Gartner, where many senior executives attend, then they're the ones who are going to be in the exhibit area, and you need a senior executive at your booth to talk senior executive to senior executive. If you're at a larger show where it's just a mix of people, then you should have a mix of people, and maybe you don't need the senior executives to stay at the booth, but you need the senior executives to go to the networking events and meet people, go to the special events where the other senior people will be. So it's really, there's no one right answer. Both of your thoughts are good, and it just really depends on what your goals are for that show.
I love it. I have another idea, and that is making a fanfare using social media and the conference hashtag, and making it so that it's depending on the size of your company. If it's too small, probably doesn't really work very well. But the medium size to larger size, have the CEO make a guest appearance inside the booth and blow that up on social so that people see it, and they're flocking to go see the CEO right inside there. But before I get your comment on that, and also the objective while inside of the booth, like my objective was to scan the badges, right? Scan the badges. And we used to compete, like who can get the most badge scans, right? And they gamify that on some of these new scanning tools. Before I get your perspective on what's the objective while inside the booth, I want to make sure that everyone listens into this message right now from our program sponsor. Opinions in sales are your worst enemy. Here's why. Your business has million-dollar questions that if you could answer with facts, you'd have an unfair advantage. Those questions are, what really separates your best reps from the rest? Why does half of your pipeline slip? And what's the best message to go to market with? If your answers were facts instead of opinions, you'd win the unfair share of your market. It turns out the truth is buried right underneath your nose. It's found in the customer conversations your team has every day. Introducing Gong.io. Gain powerful visibility into your customer conversations. With Gong, you'll win more deals, skyrocket rep success, and gain critical market intelligence that will help you achieve revenue success and win the lion's share of the wealth. Go to gong.io/demo to get started today. All right. Right before that program break from our sponsor, we were talking about the objective for working the booth. And my objective has always been is scan the badge, and gamify that, compete, who can get the most number of badge scans. I think it's brilliant. Do you agree?
Well, Mario, I have a very strict No badge scanning policy.
Oh, no. Well, okay. I gotta hear this. So no badge scanning.
No badge scanning policy. So you're right. We reward people in the oddest ways. It's like, just remember, people will do exactly what you pay them to do. And if we are paying them or rewarding them in some way to scan badges, of course, that's what they're going to do. And a quick story on that. A friend of mine and my co-founder, Diana Guerin, a friend of ours, was told to get 2,000 badge scans, and then he was going to get a big prize. Well, there wasn't enough activity at the booth, and he was trying to step into the aisle and scan some badges, but it just wasn't working. So he went over by the restrooms. And he just stood between the two restrooms, and then he would call out to people, "Do you mind if I scan your badge? Do you mind?" And some of them said yes. And so, I mean, imagine. So marketing, hello, what marketing director out there would like that list? It's just insane. So
did he hit his quota is the question. Did he hit his quota?
Did he hit his quota? He got the prize. And so I guess in some ways that was a win-win strategy. But what it did not deliver was a qualified lead. Mm-hmm. And it also clogged up the marketing system with a lot of people who, you know, weren't interested. And when they made those follow-up calls, of course, the people never even remembered coming by the booth because they hadn't come by the booth. So I really want people to stop scanning badges. Please stop rewarding people for badge scans. What we really want to do instead is have conversations that are memorable, which means you're asking questions that make people think of things maybe they haven't thought of before. You're bringing insights to them that maybe they hadn't heard or maybe they had forgotten. And you're empathizing with the person, the job they do, the challenges at that job, the challenges of the industry. Those are the things that make a memorable conversation. So asking questions that make people think, bringing insights that they may not have thought of before or needed to hear again, and then empathy, empathizing with them, the job they do, and the challenges in their industry. When you have those kinds of conversations, people gladly hand over their business card with all the correct contact information, and most of them will even scribble their cell phone number on the back for you if it's not on their card, because they actually really want to talk to you again.
So you're suggesting then that you get the business card, but one of the big challenges with the business card is you lose it, you forget to put it in, you put it in your pocket. And I mean, that's obviously one of the benefits being able to have the badge scanner. But I think what you're saying on the other side is attendees know the trick. And so they're going to put limited information on their badge scanning. They're going to put their name, their phone number, possibly even a generic email address that they don't check, and or the company phone number line that is not their personal line. So you're saying it's not a value. So therefore, stop focusing on the badge scan and focus on getting the business card. I think that's very insightful. I never even thought about that from a buyer perspective.
Now, Mario, I'm not going to mention any names here, but there are tools out there that are way better than the scanners that come with the trade show. Yeah. And those tools will scan the business card as well.
Well, no, you can mention names. I mean, you could feel free, like give me an example of some.
Yeah. So Modus has a tool called Capture, which is phenomenal. Okay. And not only, you can set it up pre-show to scan the badge and collect that data, to scan the card, but not only that, you have a quick way to input information about that person to help trigger your memory when you email them and call them later on. And you can set it up so there's a few quick things you can click that will remind you if it's somebody who definitely wants a call back, or if you actually schedule an appointment with them. So there are the Modus Capture tool and others out there so that you don't have to worry about typing in all that data afterwards. It will go directly into your CRM, and it will go in there with the notes that you provided so you can remember, because you're going to talk to a lot of people during a trade show and you need to remember some things about them.
And that's one of the biggest problems is you scan the badge, you have a 5-minute, 7-minute, 10-minute conversation with somebody, and where do you take the notes at? Where are the notes going for that whole conversation? Right. So now many of the badge scanners have those little, typing pads that you can put in your notes. But the reality is somebody smart out there needs to invent a conversation recorder, like maybe using, I don't know, gong.io. And it's a mobile gong recorder that can allow you to be able to have the conversation, scan the business card, bring it in, and actually know when you send that lead through the funneling system, you know exactly what it is that person talked to.
Yeah, well, it's important because if you're going to continue a conversation with somebody, it's good to remember what you talked to them about.
Exactly.
So if there was something unique or interesting. But another cool thing with these types of tools is if they mention something specific and you have an article or a video of that, you can shoot it to them right then and there, and it will be in their inbox while they're still at the show. So these are the kinds of tools that make such a better way for you to remember and connect with the people that you talk to. So look for some tools like that and use those at the booth. So when you're having those conversations, you get the information you need, you send the information they need, you can track whether they opened it or not. And then when you email them after the show, you can comment on that. And if you've already scheduled the appointment, you can remind them of the appointment, or you can, if you haven't scheduled the appointment, you can then ask at that time to schedule an appointment.
I gotcha. That makes sense. So talk to me a little bit about some of the keys to getting like an ROI, a high ROI from trade shows. Because what I find is sometimes you'll get those immediate opportunities, but it's not often, but sometimes you do. So how do you get the high ROI from a trade show?
Yeah, this is really important. And again, it happens, maybe you actually show up at the show. Marketing and sales together have to decide really what are the measures? What things are we going to measure for this show? So how do we know this show is successful? Obviously, if you close deals after the show, that's great. But some of us have 3, 6, 8 month sales cycle, and it's got to be a long time before you know whether you sold anything because of that show. So you have to, and some even longer, right? So put some measures in place. Maybe you want to talk about certain conversations. Let's have this many conversations. So that's a measure. Yeah. How many high quality conversations did we have? Another measure might be how many qualified leads did we generate? So that means that it's someone who wants to talk to us again, right?
Yeah.
So you could also measure how many appointments are set during the trade show for conversations after the trade show. You could certainly measure things like if you made pre-appointments, did people show up? So how many appointments did we make before the show to meet with people at the show? And how many of those showed up? So these are all different kinds of things you can measure. But most importantly, what I want to measure is how many sales opportunities did we put in our pipeline? And so if we think about how a sales opportunity is opened, and at every company it might be different, but the person said, yes, I'm interested, and you've either scheduled an appointment or they've agreed to schedule an appointment afterwards, and you now have a discovery conversation, then how many discovery conversations did you have because of the show? And then you can also watch to see whether those move forward. And of course, in the end, did we close any business? Yeah. So it's not just closed business. There's other measures that are high ROI also. And if you're a young company, it's your first time at a show, you should expect to set appointments. You should expect to have great high quality conversations and measure that. You should expect to schedule some appointments for after the show, but don't expect a lot of sales to close because this might be the first time they ever even met you and they just want to learn about what you can do. And then maybe after a longer period of time of nurturing them, they come and see you at that show again next year. And that's when you might have more closed deals. So closed deals are important, but it's not the only measure.
Yeah. It's like the whole approach to omni-channel sales prospecting. You need to understand that you may be touching your customer in multiple ways to eventually get to a close. And the way I think about this from myself is if I'm doing a trade show is just a big, giant networking event. So if I'm going to send a salesperson to a small networking event, or whether or not I'm going to send multiple salespeople to a giant networking event, it's also similar to sending people to use LinkedIn as an example, which is a giant online networking event that's open 24 hours a day. it's also the same type of modeling, I think, in my opinion, that a BDR is doing when they're cold calling, right? They're looking to speak to have a conversation. So for me, I loved what you said about measure the number of sales conversations that you had. Calculate what the cost of that sales conversation was. Is it higher or lower than having your BDRs dial for dollars? How many conversations did they get in that dial for dollars for 60-day, 90-day, however many day period, and measure the difference between I'm going to spend $100,000 one time and have 7,000 sales conversations. I'm just making the numbers up, right? $100,000, 7,000 sales conversations, or I'm going to hire 75 BDRs and have them dial for 12 months to get 7,000 conversations. Like, that's a simple ROI in terms of measuring the sales conversation.
Yes. And it's important to look at all your lead generation methods and determine which are giving you the best results for the best cost, right? So you may get a lot of results, but it costs a lot. You may get low results and it costs a lot. So we want to look at all our lead generation methods. And in this omni-channel type of prospecting, trade shows should be one of the channels. And here's an interesting statistic from CEIR, which is the Center for Exhibit Industry Research. They say that it costs 62% less to close a lead generated from a show versus one that was generated in the field. I'm not really sure how they came up with that, but think about it. If I am doing the right things at a show, it is a target-rich environment. If my salespeople know what to do and know how to have the right conversations, if they've pre-booked appointments, I can see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe more people during a trade show. That's one travel budget. That's, just 2 nights in a hotel or 3 nights in a hotel. It's not me flying all over the country to meet one-on-one. So when you consolidate it, if you do it well, you should be able to get a lower cost of sale. So think about all the things that you can do to make that target-rich environment work for you as one of the channels. Now, imagine if before the show ever happened, you touched those people by phone, by email, by social media, right? And remember David Elkington, that was one of the shows I really loved, when you talked to him, and he was saying, look, if you are using 2 methods to try to reach people, let's just say the old-fashioned phone and email, you're getting limited results. But when you add one more channel, one more method, I think he said a 400% increase in engagement. Yeah. So if we take trade shows as another channel, we are really increasing our engagement, especially if we do all the pre-work ahead of time. And now this is maybe like the 4th channel we've touched them on, and they're expecting to see us at the show. They're excited about it. They can't wait to continue talking with us because they've already been on the phone, on email, and on social media with us.
Yeah. Alice is referring to, for those listening in, it was the David Elkington show that we did a few months ago, actually. And the statistic was with 1 to 2 different sales outreach methods. So let's just take phone and email. The buyer engagement is roughly at about 10% response rate, right? But by Alice, to your point, when you add on just one more, 3 to 4, then your buyer engagement rate goes up by 300% to 40% engagement, to 40% engagement, right? So it was a very, very big spike just by adding on one more touch.
I wanted it to be 400%, but all right. 40% is really good.
40%. The engagement went up to. I think he might have said 400% increase, but it's actually a 300% increase. So, but nonetheless, it's a valid point. And trade shows, I should redesign my keynote to actually have that as part of the omnichannel sales prospecting, which has trade shows on there. That's probably a good item to add on top of that. Very good point. Insightful for sure. So how should companies train their staff to really support trade show booths?
Well, in advance of any show, what we want to do is get sales and marketing organized together and prepare the right messaging for that particular show, prepare the graphics, prepare everything so that it matches the graphics on the booth and the messaging that we're going to send out and the graphics on the emails that we're going to send out. All the messaging, visual and auditory and written, should all be together. So everyone's trained on that. And that way we become more memorable from the start, because maybe we're going to post on social media using a certain banner that is going to look exactly like what's on the booth, and it's going to look exactly like what's on the email. So now people start seeing that image over and over again. They start seeing that same message over and over again, and that starts to get into their memory. Then if you talk to them about those same topics and say, hey, we'd love to see you at the booth to continue talking about X. So we've got all these things ahead of time that help people know us and remember us and know the theme that we're going to be talking about at the show. Now, how do you come up with that? Well, your marketing team, or if you don't have a marketing team, then it's up to you. You need to research the industry trends. You need to research the show trends. Like, what is the topic of the show? Like, what is really hot? What is the keynote speaker going to be talking about? Because that will be the buzz of the show, right? If there's a theme for that show, it's usually tied to something that's going on in the industry. So someone has to do that research and find out what's going on in the industry right now that's impacting the people who will be at the show, and what has the show chosen as their theme and topics, and what will the keynote speaker be speaking about. Now you take that and figure out how that is something that your company can impact. And that's the way you design your messaging and your conversations. So if, for example, you're in the sales world, like Mario and I are, and we're going to a trade show or a conference that's about sales, we know that people are talking about digital transformations. We know they're talking about having empathetic conversations. We know that they're talking about buyer engagement and the buyer journey. So how does what we sell impact any of that? We want to get our messaging built around that. And again, bring insights. So we're going to be talking at our booth about how digital transformation is challenging at companies because people are not used to it. It's change, So now we want to have that conversation versus just like, hey, do you want to see my demo? Yeah, right. It completely changes things. So we have to prepare everyone ahead of time with that messaging and that conversation and practice it. And then we have to let them know when they're going to be in the booth, what they should be doing while they're in the booth, how to strike up a conversation, how to get eye contact. Some people, believe it or not, don't know how to do that, how to draw people into the booth. We want to teach them all of those things. And then we want to teach them what to do when they're not in the booth. When you're not in the booth, one thing, drink water and rest, right? Because we want you fresh when you come back. Eat food, drink water, and rest. When you're supposed to be at a networking event, be there and know what to do at that networking event. We want to do all that training in advance. So whoever we've chosen to go to the show, they all need to be trained in all of these things.
I love it. And if you need help, you can certainly go to TradeShowMakeover.com.
TradeShowMakeover.com.
TradeShowMakeover.com. I love it. Alice, if someone wants to get a hold of you, I heard you say earlier that they could connect with you on LinkedIn, but if you are going to reach out to Alice Heiman, we'll put her LinkedIn profile and her link into the show notes, but it's Heiman, Alice on LinkedIn. Make sure you tell her that you heard her on the Selling with Social podcast, sales podcast. And Alice, do you have a Twitter handle that people could tweet at?
I do. It's at Alice Heiman, and it's the same on Instagram at Alice Heiman. So I should be pretty easy to find if you spell it right, which is, like Mario said, Heiman. And I would love to connect with you on any of those channels.
I love it. And my last question for you is all-time favorite movie. What is it?
Oh, someone else asked me this on a podcast recently, and my favorite all-time movie is Hitch.
Hitched. I love that movie. That was a great one. They made a perfect partnership and perfect character. That was a really good movie. I love it. Well, for those of you who are listening in, don't turn off that dial. Don't stop that play button right now. Make sure you tune in for this final message right now. Thanks for joining us. Sales managers, before you go, does it feel like everything is a priority and everyone is asking for your time and attention? Here's a free video training that will help you manage your time, double your income, and will skyrocket your team's success. It's called the Sales Management Matrix. You'll learn exactly how to spend your time for the highest revenue return possible. Go to gong.com gong.io/matrix to get the free 19-minute video training. Again, that's gong.io/matrix. Go there now, and we'll see you on the next episode. Hey, thanks for listening to the Selling with Social Sales podcast. Did you enjoy that show? If so, would you do me a huge favor and give the Selling with Social podcast a rating and review on iTunes? That would be super awesome. Also, if you want to easily find our show, just go to Vengreso.com. That's VENGRESO.com and click on podcast. From there, you'll find the Selling with Social podcast. Thanks for listening in. And until the next show, be awesome. Mario Martinez Jr.